date is November the 13th, 2022. This may be my last day on Earth. After getting hitched last November, my husband and I backpacked across the world. We embarked on an epic excursion in lieu of a honeymoon. We flew from London, abandoning our jobs, families and friends. As it would transpire, however, we hadn't abandoned everything. In October of this year, John and I were renting a secluded villa near the Norwegian town of Larvik. My husband planned an exploration of Bøkeskogen, otherwise known as the beech tree forest. I willed my heart to go along with the romantic expedition, but I was overwhelmingly anxious. I had been unnerved long before Norway. For months, I've been warning John that a man was following us, but I'm a woman with a nervous disposition. Everybody in my life knows that. And understandably, my husband paid little attention to my fretting. That still infuriated me, of course. It's true that my fragile instincts have misled me in the past, but I knew my eyes weren't deceiving me. The stranger may well have been pursuing us since we left Britain, but it was only when John and I reached Berlin that I first became aware of him. As we prepared for bed, I drew the curtains, and then I saw a lonesome man standing on an empty cobbled road, eyeballing me, loitering with sinister intent, determined purpose. This was no accidental meeting of gazes. He was looking directly at me. I could not see the man's eyes, but I could feel them upon my flesh. A male stare crawling across my body like a tentative, patient insect. And this silhouette of a man seemed so familiar. He wore a green zipped parka, a colour so vivid that it burnt into one's memory. I'd seen the man before, there was no doubt about it, but it had taken repeat viewings to truly register him. I should have paid attention. In Barcelona, he joined our group on the walking tour. I remember thinking that it seemed far too warm for such a bulky raincoat. The stranger certainly made an impression on me. Heaven knows how many times I missed him. "You're scaring me, Louise," John said. "Well, yeah, it's scary. Who is he?" I asked. "I don't know. Surely not the same man," my husband replied, but his voice seemed unsteady. "It's him, John. I saw him in Belgium too. Remember that terrible pub?" The one with the gross ale?" he asked. "Yeah," I nodded. "I remember seeing a man with that exact green parka. I know I did. I was drunk, but I saw it." Well, that resolved the matter in John's mind. I had been far too intoxicated for any account of that evening to be trustworthy. To him, the case was closed, and I would have loved to sweep it under the rug, but I wasn't convinced. That night, I stayed up whilst John slept, preparing himself for a full day of hiking through Bøkeskogen. I was sitting in front of the lounge's exposing windows, floor-to-ceiling glass panes that lined the forest-facing side of the property. Waves of blackened woodland lay beyond the transparent layer of flimsy protection. What's that quote? "And if you gaze for long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you." I don't care much for existential dread. I believe in the here and now. Never mind ghouls or ghosts, creatures or demons. Reality is more dreadful than anything fantastical. When I eyed the endless beech tree forest, all I saw was the man with the green parka, and that instilled me with a sufficiently deep terror. He was skulking in the night. When I woke, having only managed a few hours of rest, I was shattered and unwilling to go anywhere, But John insisted on exploring. He was comfortably certain that I was merely drawing dots between a sequence of coincidences. You want to see a green Parker everywhere, so you're seeing a green Parker everywhere, John explained, leaning forwards to give me a kiss. It's confirmation bias, Louise. You know that, don't you? Deep down. I suppose so, I said, joining my husband on the porch. But that man in Berlin was watching me. Well, he was probably a creep. But we're not in Berlin now, are we? We're in Norway. And that man isn't here. I really did try to forget about the stranger. It seemed rotten to not enjoy the holiday. And I was awestruck by the beech tree forest. A land of natural splendour, unspoiled by the chaotic world that I'd hoped to escape on our travels. The more I thought about that, however, the worse the thoughts became. In spite of my husband's soothing words, I ruminated. Who is this man? I wondered. We should head home, I said. It's only 2:00. John barked back, laughing as he ploughed ahead. Yes, and we set off at midday, so we won't get back until 4:00 at the earliest, I stated, feebly attempting to hide the jitter in my voice. Oh, just another 10 minutes of walking, please. It won't be that dark when we get back, he insisted. I felt like throwing a tantrum. How could John not see? How could my husband not feel the fear I felt? The man in the Parker had been stalking us since London. It was no longer a thought, but an undeniable fact. We were not free of him. Fine, I conceded. 10 minutes, then we turn back. John merrily skipped along, and I begrudgingly plodded behind him. I was no longer admiring the neatly packed trees on either side of the footpath. I was gazing at the sky. The sun seemed to be moving far too quickly. I remember thinking that. Nothing supernatural. I could simply sense it racing to the horizon. Daylight was rapidly disappearing, and I had an unshakable feeling that the beauty of the forest would disappear with it. The sun set at 4:15. I lit the way with the torch, flitting my eyes between my watch and the footpath as we sped back to our isolated villa. Well, I sped. John was huffing and puffing behind me. Will you slow down? He panted. You stopped for 20 minutes to take photos. I told you we needed to head back, I snapped. It sounds mean, but I was irritated. I wanted John to take me seriously, but he was the type to bury his head in the dirt and burrow to China at the first sign of trouble. And I don't mind being the dominant half of a couple. However, John's apathy and conflict intolerance were poor character traits in a crisis. Relax, Louise. We're, 30 minutes away? John replied. More like 40, I whispered. And then I heard the snap of a twig. I instinctively stopped in my tracks, but John trudged obliviously forwards. Wait, I cried. Oh, what? You said you wanted to get back, he groaned. I heard something, I whimpered. John moodily stopped walking, and I turned around, frantically scouring the surrounding trees to find the source of the noise. I cast the torchlight in John's direction, and he shielded his eyes. Do you mind? He cried. I slowly moved the light across the tree line, heart hammering my rib cage. It was just an animal, John said. It wasn't an animal, I screeched as quietly as possible. A louder snap sounded, followed by the noisy rustling of shrubbery. I cast the light in the direction of the second disturbance, and I caught a glimpse of something haunting. A green shape slipped beyond the reach of my light, and bushes rustled behind it. "Did you see that?" I frightfully asked, sweat drenching my face. "Yes," John grumpily spat, barging past me. "It was an animal. Come on, I want to go home." As we walked, I listened attentively. The forest was quiet. Silent, in fact. That was worse than branches splintering and leaves crumpling. Seeing and hearing the hooded man somehow felt better than the unknown. Drowning in terror, I started to convince myself that he might be something paranormal. He was still following us, watching, but to do so without a sound, it hardly seemed possible. We returned to the villa around 4:20. Not late, not at all, but at the climax of autumn, night comes swiftly, and on this late afternoon, the outer world was a pitch-black hole far from civilization. Our black, brittle house was set in a blacker landscape. Coming to terms with that, I suddenly found that I didn't feel comforted by the sight of shelter. If something were to go wrong, who would help us? As my husband unlocked the door, I braced for the man in the green parka to be waiting in the hallway. John twisted the key, stepped inside, and turned on the main lights in the open living area. The villa was empty. Again, that somehow felt worse, and the knot in my gut only tightened. I shut the front door behind us and hurriedly locked it. "I'm going to bed," John grumbled, stomping up the spiral staircase to the bedroom. "Okay. I'm just going to stay out here for a while," I replied. The chasm of night felt blacker than the day before, larger somehow, as if the forest were growing, as if we were slipping farther and farther from the reach of people with every passing day. I wasn't dealing with hypotheticals anymore. The man in the green parka was out there. He was the void. "What do you want?" I wailed in a voice barely louder than a house mouse. As if responding, the outdoor light was triggered. In the clearing between our villa and the forest, the man in the green parka stood. I tried to scream for John, but my voice was hoarse. No noise came from my lips, and no movement came from my body. The man and I must have locked eyes for no more than 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Detecting no more motion, the light turned off. Glass shattered and footsteps scattered. The hooded man had hurled something at the light to break it. I realized this was it. He had become more than a watcher. He had torn the veil between us.
"Louise?"
John appeared at the top of the stairs.
"What was that sound?"
"Stay there, John," I warned, heading towards him.
"Did you break something?"
He asked. "Do not come downstairs," I continued, quietly tiptoeing towards the staircase. "We need to call the police." I was interrupted by the sound of knocking on the front door.
"What the? Who's that? We're in the middle of nowhere,"
John said. "Call the police," I repeated, pausing in the main hallway. My husband didn't listen. He raced downstairs, but I beat him to the door and clumsily unbolted all of the locks. I know gender roles dictate otherwise, but, as I said, I didn't trust John in a crisis. I didn't know what he'd do when faced with the awful man. And then I eyed the unlocked door, hesitant to take the final step. "Louise," John began. "Don't do it. Just step away." I did the opposite, and John gasped. Gasped as he realised I'd been right all along. The man in the green parka.
"Call the police,"
I screamed, refusing to peel my eyes away from the menacing figure in the doorway. The patter of rapid, fading footsteps startled me.
John?
I whimpered, maintaining eye contact with the man at the door. John did not reply. He fled. "My name is Peter Blake," the man said.
"I called the police,"
I lied, weeping. "She died here," the man continued, ignoring my incessant crying. "My beautiful daughter. This is where it always ends."
"Please, please,"
I choked.
"Don't beg me. I'm trying to save you,"
the man said.
"Save me from what?"
I asked. It happened so quickly. The hooded man fell silent. There was John. He stood at Peter's side, plunging a stainless steel knife into the stranger's skull. After he let the hooded man's body drop like worn laundry, my husband turned to face me.
"From me,"
John laughed. Finally, my terrified body chose to flee, not freeze. I sprinted into the kitchen, ignoring the thudding steps behind me, and shot through the open back door. I headed towards the forest. Not a great move, perhaps, but we were in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't going to return inside and hunt for the keys to the car. John would have caught me. My only hope was to hide deep in the forest until morning. Realising I'd left the torch at the house, I pulled out my phone and used it to light the way. Over the sound of my rapidly beating heart and the grass crunching beneath my feet, I heard Demented cackling.
"Louise!"
John sweetly called from the darkness behind me. He sounded inhuman. Gone was the man I married. I felt nauseated as I realised I'd been living with a monster. Loving a monster. I resisted the urge to cry and vomit. Adrenaline fueled me onwards. I buried myself within the dense forest, too afraid to find the footpath and make myself an easy target. It felt oddly reminiscent of our walk an hour earlier. Yet again, I was being stalked by an invisible and silent predator. I longed for John to say something else, longed for him to even unleash another icy giggle. But he had become one with the terrifying forest. The forest that enveloped me, strangled me. I realised I was having a panic attack. "Not now," I wheezed, stumbling around breathlessly. I just needed my primal instincts to carry me a little farther before I could allow myself the relief of completely falling apart. So, when I saw an entanglement of branches and leaves in the distance, I headed towards it. I was gasping for air, but I managed to fall into the makeshift den, cutting my arms and legs on branches as I tumbled. I lay flat on my face in the dirt, using wobbly fingers to dial 113, Norway's emergency number. I have a hazy memory of the conversation with the operator, but I'm thankful that he spoke English. I gave him the address of the villa, and he told me that it would take half an hour for the dispatched police officers to reach the house. Half an hour? It's over, I decided. The police will have to search the forest to find me. John will beat them to it. I couldn't feel his eyes upon me, as I had with Peter Blake, but I could sense them searching for me. I turned off my phone light. I didn't want to advertise my location to him. I remember thinking that maybe I could stay deathly quiet and wait for the police to scare John away. But it would be 30 minutes, at the very least, before they even started to search the forest. It was too long. And then I saw it. Not what I expected to see. The green parka. John was wearing it. He had stolen it from Peter's corpse. In the dim light of his own phone torch, I could make out red smears on the coat, and I had to exert all of my willpower just to avoid hurling. I couldn't even see John. The parka was zipped up, and his face was lost in the ceaseless black hole at the centre of the hood. I love it out here, my husband whispered. So quiet, so peaceful. I'm furious that Peter disturbed our precious time together. But he's gone now. It's over, darling. Let's go back to the house. My hands were clasped over my mouth, and tears were rolling down my cheeks. John surveyed the area with his phone light. He must have been no more than 20 or 30 yards away from me. Fortunately, my little den was far too overgrown for my body to be visible, but John's temperament was worsening. Do you think I want to be out here in this cold forest? I'm getting bored now, Louise. Come out. He was on the verge of leaving, and then my phone buzzed. It was my mum. I was supposed to call her that evening. If only she'd waited. Just waited until the morning. I still hear John's victorious laugh in my dreams, a blood-curdling sound. Do I see you in there, Louise? Oh, that looks cosy. Mind if I join? He asked. I scrambled out of the hiding spot and started running, leaving my phone behind. It was foolish. Survival instinct isn't necessarily intellectual instinct. I was darting into the black forest and praying that I wouldn't run headfirst into a tree. I knew my best chance was to loop back to the house and hide somewhere until the police came. After 15 minutes of running in a slight zigzagging curve, I saw the distant lights of a house. The villa was the only marker in that featureless landscape. I was almost there, but then I felt the hairs stand on the back of my neck. I froze again, my body drained of willpower. Hello, darling, John whispered into my left ear. The burning sensation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I looked down to see a red pool spreading through my top. I could feel a blade in the left side of my lower back. Wailing at a volume I didn't know I could reach, I tried desperately not to pass out from the unbearable pain. And that pain tripled as John wrenched the knife from my body and shoved me to the ground. Moaning, I started to crawl. I was clawing at the light of the house. It was only a couple of 100 yards away. 10 minutes or so until the police arrived. That was what I thought to keep myself going, to keep myself conscious. You were my favourite. I hope that gives you comfort.
John said. But Peter was right. Everything ends and begins here. Wait, I pleaded, stalling for time. Don't you want to know? I rolled onto my back, wincing as I eyed the black pit within the green hood above me. John tilted his head to one side, seemingly curious. I have a secret, I whispered. Oh? What might you be hiding, Louise? He asked. I'm like you, John. And you're not my first either, I replied. You are not like me, Louise. I groaned, making up my speech as I went along. Do you think I cared about that stalker? Given the chance, I would have killed him myself. That was why I answered the door before you. I was trying to protect you, John. I didn't know you were like me. John paused. I could almost hear the cogs whirring in his head. He wasn't buying it, but that didn't matter. All I had to do was entertain him a little longer. If I could keep him interested, I could stay alive. That was my logic. I don't believe you, he said, finally. Fine. I just couldn't die without letting you know, I responded, clutching feverishly to both the lie and my last strand of life. No. Shut up, Louise. What game are you playing? This isn't... You're not playing your part. John scowled. He was furious. For the first time, I was glad I could barely see his face. I realized the void might be less terrifying than what lay beneath. It doesn't matter either way, he huffed. If you were like me, you'd understand that I have to do this. Sirens sounded. Hallelujah, I thought. I blinked, and the man in the green parka fled as quickly as he had in the house, vanishing into the blackened forest. Not lurking in the shadows. Gone. After months of being followed, it felt strange to finally be free. No eyes upon me, at long last. All I could see was the night sky. A blanket of stars above. Over here! I screamed weakly into the night. I yelled that line over and over until the police officers eventually heard and found me. I don't remember anything else from that night, but I woke in a hospital bed. My parents and my brother flew to Norway. They were by my side. Obviously, they were just happy I was alive, but I only thought about John. The police didn't catch him. I'm back in England now. For the past month, I've been jumping at the sight of my own shadow. I moved away from London, but this isn't the same as being pursued by Peter. I could always feel that old man watching me. He didn't conceal himself. John, on the other hand, is a ghost. I don't feel his gaze, but my head tells me that he's close. Last night, I was drawing my bedroom curtains, and I saw a fleeting flash of something green in an alley.